Romy, in 2003, you had a near-death experience. Can you tell us how this came about? Yes, it actually was a Saturday, January 4th, 2003 to be exact. And the situation with my former husband and my children was very difficult. And I, as a person, was no longer existent. At breakfast that day, there was an incident, but I managed to reach the bathroom where I collapsed. And then, suddenly nothing was the way it was before. Without any transition, I found myself in a very, very bright light that usually would dazzle. But in the proper sense of the word, it was not dazzling. It was all light around me, and it also was love. It was incredible. I felt like I was back in the all-encompassing unity I had known as a child, and also back in this tremendous love. Actually, it's impossible to put this into the words available to us. This is absolutely not possible, because all of what I experienced doesn't exist here. But it was something like a homecoming, as well as an absolute rightness. And while I was, strangely, I was wondering why everything, the floor, everything, there was nothing but this brightness. And this brightness could be walked on like a floor, which I found really impressive. And then my great-grandmother approached me. I must say that when I was a child, I considered my great-grandmother as being loved personified. She was a very, very unusual woman who had had a relatively hard life, but she was full of love. It was incredible. She approached me, and I was so happy to see her. I ran toward her and wanted to hug her, but then she said, "Oh, my child, here you have to stand still. You must not stay here. You have to turn around and go back." Well, at this point, I did just as Peter had done. I wasn't obedient. I didn't go back, and I refused to go back 3 times. And with every refusal, the weight on my conscience grew heavier, because I knew I had my children and would leave them in a situation that I couldn't answer for. And when I finally turned around, I saw my children kneeling to the left and right of me. My little boy shook me, saying, "Mummy, Mummy, you can't leave us. You can't just die. We can't stay alone with Papa." And at that moment, I was back again. It was very strange. For 2 hours, I couldn't move, but I could talk to the children. And, I was then able to take some decisions that were actually life-saving for me, and which had not been possible for me previous to this experience. And I was again myself. I was completely lost previously, but this experience was a coming home, which I had experienced already as a child. And it was again possible for us to continue living. But at the time, I didn't understand all this, but I rather experienced it. I only understood it gradually, and then also later on, I began to see more clearly and make connections. But in the end, that was the impetus needed to get us out of a hopeless situation. And all of that happened. Although I had no life-threatening disease or the like, I just wasn't there anymore. And then I had this experience and was put back here again. And how did you recognize your great-grandmother? How did you perceive her? Did she have a shape? Yes, indeed, she had a shape. My great-grandmother was actually my favorite and much loved grandma. That's what we all felt. And she was looking as I always knew her. My great-grandmother had a deformation on her nose because she had for a long time cared for her frail husband who had been suffering from colon cancer. And because of pus that had gotten into a wound, her nose became misshapen. And then she was wearing her anthracite-colored smock wrapped around her body and tied at the waist with a bow to the front, and on which there were little gray flowers. And that was usually always her favorite item of clothing, and this is how she was almost every day. I never saw her feet, only a little part of them was protruding directly below the smock, and she had such a very special glance that was typical of her. For example, when we fell as children, she came and said, "Oh, my dear little child," and all the love in the world came out of her. And that's the way she was. And that couldn't be anyone else. She was it. The way she was speaking and looking out of her eyes. The appearance was the same, and also her hair that had been tied into a little bun. So it couldn't be someone else. It was clearly her, and completely alive. And what I particularly noticed was that she had nothing at all to worry about. Although I had the impression that she might be worried about me at that moment, but she had such a contented expression on her face, which I had never seen during her lifetime. Surely due to her life story, that was the great thing. How long ago was it that your grandmother passed away? My great-grandmother died 34 years before, but she was still the most important person for me, and she still is today. You have just said that your children were kneeling next to you. Yes, when I had walked into the bathroom, I just collapsed there next to the bathtub. I don't know what else happened. The only thing I know is that when I was looking down, I saw myself lying down there on the floor, and to the left and right of me, the children were crouching and kneeling, shaking me in a complete state of desperation, because the situation at the time was such that we had to absolutely separate from my former husband, because that had meanwhile become a life-threatening situation. And the children simply panicked, realizing that I was not conscious. I don't know if I still had a heartbeat or if I was showing any other sign of life. I don't know that. But the children's impression was obviously that I was no longer conscious, and for this reason they were in despair, because now they all were simply at the mercy of others, and this was, well, awful for me to realize. And I was so ashamed that 3 times I said, "No, I won't go back. I will not turn around." And I also got this feeling that I let my children down for a moment. And that's why I was undergoing psychotherapy, because I had a hard time coping with that. But then everything was fine, and then I was fine again. What impact did this near-death experience have on your future life? Well, the impact became apparent gradually. First, I should like to say that as a child, I actually spent up to 1 day in paradise before my 6th birthday. I always had the feeling everything is one. I had no fear. I never had the feeling of being left. I really had, well, I was just part of the whole. And one day, after my 6th birthday, that was suddenly no longer the case. All of a sudden. I couldn't formulate that as a child, of course, but now, in retrospect, I suddenly stood there. It was clear to me, that's me. The earth is the earth, the cat is the cat. And all this was suddenly no longer an all-encompassing unity. It was terrible. I cried my eyes out. I remember that day very well. And then Over time, and because of certain events, some of them lasting for years, I had become a nothing. I, as a person, was no longer present. I just was functioning, and I played the role that was meant for me. And the very moment when I lost consciousness, I suddenly found myself within this love. And after that, this mental condition constantly developed until I reached again the view of a child. But this was a very long process, and sometimes also very painful. But due to this near-death experience, and the fact that this feeling of oneness with everything was back again, as well as this incredible love, it became more and more possible for me to find myself again. Also, some of the situations that still were occurring were, well, shall I say, a little more difficult to handle. And today, I am simply, well, I am in the midst of my own life. And I also feel this oneness of everything again, as I did when I was a child. I am able to incredibly rejoice in something, and many, many years have passed since. Recently, we went again on holiday for the first time. We were in the mountains, and seeing this greatness and knowing that I was a part of it, after I had lost this special sense for a very long time, and also having regained this incredible joy of life that I have now wherever I go. Even in times of sorrow or something like that, all this enables me to cope with grief. Because I know, for example, when my mother died at the beginning of the year, I was so happy for her. I was so happy that she finally did it. I was crying, surely, because she was gone for me. But this feeling that no matter what we have to go through on earth, we are all right. We go where everything is good. And now this knowledge is the dominant force in every field of life. It developed over the years, because only in retrospect did I understand a great deal more, slowly but surely. And I think that there might be still a lot more insight added. But it's a really wonderful life with that experience, and knowing that whenever I go there again, even though I'm sure that what I was allowed to see and experience was just a quick glimpse of over there, it was only a brief view. But the idea that I will be back there again cannot be appreciated highly enough. It is wonderful. Romy, thank you so very much for the interview, and a big thanks also to you